Brought to you by Wikipedia Documentaries. Gautama Buddha. Gautama Buddha, also known as Siddhārtha Gautama, Shakyamuni Buddha, or simply the Buddha, after the title of Buddha, was an ascetic and sage, on whose teachings Buddhism was founded. He is believed to have lived and taught mostly in the eastern part of ancient India sometime between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE. Gautama taught a middle way between sensual indulgence and the severe asceticism found in the śramaṇa movement common in his region. He later taught throughout other regions of eastern India such as Magadha and Kosala. Gautama is the primary figure in Buddhism. He is recognized by Buddhists as an enlightened teacher who attained full Buddhahood, and shared his insights to help sentient beings end rebirth and suffering. Accounts of his life, discourses, and monastic rules are believed by Buddhists to have been summarized after his death and memorized by his followers. Various collections of teachings attributed to him were passed down by oral tradition and first committed to writing about 400 years later. Historical Siddhārtha Gautama. Scholars are hesitant to make unqualified claims about the historical facts of the Buddha's life. Most accept that he lived, taught and founded a monastic order during the Magadha era, during the reign of Bimbisara, the ruler of the Magadha Empire, and died during the early years of the reign of Ajatasattu, who was the successor of Bimbisara, thus making him a younger contemporary of Mahavira, the giant Tirthankara. Apart from the Vedic Brahmins, the Buddha's lifetime coincided with the flourishing of influential Śramaṇa schools of thought like Ajivika, Karvaka, Jainism, and Ajnana. Brahmajala Sutta records 62 such schools of thought. It was also the age of influential thinkers like Mahavira, Purana Kassapa, Makali Gosala, Ahitakesa Kambali, Pakadakakayana, and Sanjaya Balaitha, as recorded in Samanaphala Sutta, whose viewpoints the Buddha most certainly must have been acquainted with. Indeed, Sariputta and Moggallana, two of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, were formerly the foremost disciples of Sanjaya Balaitha, the skeptic, and the Pali Canon frequently depicts Buddha engaging in debate with the adherents of rival schools of thought. Thus, Buddha was just one of the many Śramaṇa philosophers of that time. There is also evidence to suggest that the two masters, Alara Kalama and Udakiramiputta, were indeed historical figures, and they most probably taught Buddha two different forms of meditative techniques. While the general sequence of birth, maturity, renunciation, search, awakening and liberation, teaching, death, is widely accepted, there is less consensus on the veracity of many details contained in traditional biographies. The times of Gautama's birth and death are uncertain. Most historians in the early 20th century dated his lifetime as circa 563 BCE to 483 BCE. More recently, his death is dated later, between 411 and 400 BCE, while at a symposium on this question held in 1988, the majority of those who presented definite opinions gave dates within 20 years either side of 400 BCE for the Buddha's death. These alternative chronologies, however, have not yet been accepted by all historians. The evidence of the early texts suggests that Siddhārtha Gautama was born into the Shakya clan, a community that was on the periphery, both geographically and culturally, of the eastern Indian subcontinent in the 5th century BCE. It was either a small republic or an oligarchy, and his father was an elected chieftain, or oligarch. According to the Buddhist tradition, Gautama was born in Lumbini, now in modern-day Nepal, and raised in the Shakya capital of Kapilvastu.
which may have been either in what is present-day Tilauricut, Nepal or Pirprawa, India.
He obtained his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, gave his first sermon in Sarnath, and died in Kasinagar. No written records about Gautama were found from his lifetime, or some centuries thereafter. One edict of Asoka, who reigned from circa 269 BCE to 232 BCE, commemorates the emperor's pilgrimage to the Buddha's birthplace in Lumbini.
Another one of his edicts mentions the titles of several Dharma texts, establishing the existence of a written Buddhist tradition at least by the time of the Maurya era. These texts may be the precursor of the Pali Canon. The oldest surviving Buddhist manuscripts are the Gandharan Buddhist texts, reported to have been found in or around Hadar near Jalalabad in eastern Afghanistan, and now preserved in the British Library.
They are written in the Ganari language using the Kharosthi script on 27 birch bark manuscripts and date from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE. Biographical sources. The sources for the life of Siddhārtha Gautama are a variety of different, and sometimes conflicting, traditional biographies. These include the Buddhakarita, Lalita Vistra Sutra, Mathavastu, and the Nidinakatha. Of these, the Buddhakarita is the earliest full biography, an epic poem written by the poet Asvaghosha in the 1st century CE. The Lalita Vistra Sutra is the next oldest biography, a Mahayana, Sarvastivada biography dating to the 3rd century CE. The Mahavastu, from the Mahasimgika Lokottaravada tradition, is another major biography, composed incrementally until perhaps the 4th century CE. The Dharmaguptaka biography of the Buddha is the most exhaustive, and is entitled the Abhaniskramana Sutra, and various Chinese translations of this date between the 3rd and 6th century CE. The Nidinakatha is from the Theravada tradition in Sri Lanka and was composed in the 5th century by Buddhahood. From canonical sources come the Jataka tales, the Mahapadana Sutta, and the Akariyabhuta Sutta, which include selective accounts that may be older, but are not full biographies. The Jatakas retell previous lives of Gautama as a bodhisattva, and the first collection of these can be dated among the earliest Buddhist texts. The Mahapadana Sutta and Akariyabhuta Sutta both recount miraculous events surrounding Gautama's birth, such as the Bodhisattva's descent from the Tusi to heaven into his mother's womb. Nature of traditional depictions. In the earliest Buddhist texts, the Nikayas and Agamas, the Buddha is not depicted as possessing omniscience, nor is he depicted as being an eternal, transcendent being. According to Bhikkhu Analayo, ideas of the Buddha's omniscience are found only later, in the Mahayana Sutras, and later Pali commentaries are texts such as the Mathavastu. In the Sandika Sutta, the Buddha's disciple Ananda outlines an argument against the claims of teachers who say they are all-knowing, while in the Tevijavakugotta Sutta the Buddha himself states that he has never made a claim to being omniscient. Instead he claimed to have the higher knowledges. The earliest biographical material from the Pali Nikayas focuses on the Buddha's life as a śramaṇa, his search for enlightenment under various teachers such as Alara Kalama, and his 45-year career as a teacher. Traditional biographies of Gautama generally include numerous miracles, omens, and supernatural events. The character of the Buddha in these traditional biographies is often that of a fully transcendent and perfected being who is unencumbered by the mundane world. In the Mathavastu, over the course of many lives, Gautama is said to have developed supramundane abilities including a painless birth conceived without intercourse, no need for sleep, food, medicine, or bathing, although engaging in such in conformity with the world, omniscience, and the ability to suppress karma. Nevertheless, some of the more ordinary details of his life have been gathered from these traditional sources.
In modern times there has been an attempt to form a secular understanding of Siddhārtha Gautama's life, by omitting the traditional supernatural elements of his early biographies. Andrew Skilton writes that the Buddha was never historically regarded by Buddhist traditions as being merely human. The ancient Indians were generally unconcerned with chronologies, being more focused on philosophy. Buddhist texts reflect this tendency, providing a clearer picture of what Gautama may have taught than of the dates of the events in his life. These texts contain descriptions of the culture and daily life of ancient India which can be corroborated from the Jain scriptures, and make the Buddha's time the earliest period in Indian history, for which significant accounts exist.
British author Karen Armstrong writes that although there is very little information that can be considered historically sound, we can be reasonably confident that Siddhārtha Gautama did exist as a historical figure. Michael Carruthers goes a bit further by stating that the most general outline of birth, maturity, renunciation, search, awakening and liberation, teaching, death must be true. Conception and birth. The Buddhist tradition regards Lumbini, in present-day Nepal, to be the birthplace of the Buddha. He grew up in Kapilavastu. The exact site of ancient Kapilavastu is unknown. It may have been either Piprawa, Uttar Pradesh, in present-day India, or Tilorakot, in present-day Nepal. Both places belonged to the Sakya territory, and are located only 15 miles apart. Gautama was born as a Kshatriya, the son of Uddadana, an elected chief of the Shakya clan, whose capital was Kapilavastu, and who were later annexed by the growing kingdom of Kosala during the Buddha's lifetime.
Gautama was the family name. His mother, Maya, Suddhodana's wife, was a Kolian princess. Legend has it that, on the night Siddhartha was conceived, Queen Maya dreamt that a white elephant with 6 white tusks entered her right side, and 10 months later Siddhartha was born. As was the Shakya tradition, when his mother Queen Maya became pregnant, she left Kapilavastu for her father's kingdom to give birth. However, her son is said to have been born on the way at Lumbini, in a garden beneath a sal tree.
The day of the Buddha's birth is widely celebrated in Theravada countries as Vesak. Buddha's birthday is called Buddha Purnima in Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, as he is believed to have been born on a full moon day. Various sources hold that the Buddha's mother died at his birth a few days or 7 days later. The infant was given the name Siddhartha, meaning, he who achieves his aim. During the birth celebrations, the hermit Siddhārtha journeyed from his mountain abode and announced that the child would either become a great king or a great sadhu. By traditional account, this occurred after Siddhartha placed his feet in a seater's hair and a seater examined the birthmarks.
Suddhodana held a naming ceremony on the 5th day, and invited 8 Brahmin scholars to read the future. All gave a dual prediction that the baby would either become a great king or a great holy man. Kondana, the youngest, and later to be the first Aratutha, then the Buddha, was reputed to be the only one who unequivocally predicted that Siddhartha would become a Buddha. While later tradition and legend characterized Uddadana as a hereditary monarch, the descendant of the Surya Vansha of, many scholars think that Uddadana was the elected chief of a tribal confederacy. Early texts suggest that Gautama was not familiar with the dominant religious teachings of his time until he left on his religious quest.
which is said to have been motivated by existential concern for the human condition.
The state of the Shakya clan was not a monarchy and seems to have been structured either as an oligarchy, or as a form of republic. The more egalitarian Ghana Sangha form of government, as a political alternative to the strongly hierarchical kingdoms, may have influenced the development of the śramaṇic Jain and Buddhist Sanghas, where monarchies tended toward Vedic Brahmanism.
Early life and marriage. Siddhārtha was brought up by his mother's younger sister, Mahapajapati. By tradition, he is said to have been destined by birth to the life of a prince and had 3 palaces built for him. Although more recent scholarship doubts this status, his father, said to be King Udadana, wishing for his son to be a great king, is said to have shielded him from religious teachings and from knowledge of human suffering. When he reached the age of 16, his father reputedly arranged his marriage to a cousin of the same age named Yasodhara. According to the traditional account, she gave birth to a son, named Rahula. Siddhārtha is said to have spent 29 years as a prince in Kapila Vastu.
Although his father ensured that Siddhārtha was provided with everything he could want and need. Buddhist scriptures say that the future Buddha felt that material wealth was not life's ultimate goal.
Renunciation and ascetic life. At the age of 29, Siddhārtha left his palace to meet his subjects. Despite his father's efforts to hide from him the sick, aged and suffering, Siddhārtha was said to have seen an old man.
When his charioteer Channa explained to him that all people grew old, the prince went on further trips beyond the palace. On these he encountered a diseased man, a decaying corpse, and an ascetic. These depressed him, and he initially strove to overcome aging, sickness, and death by living the life of an ascetic. Accompanied by Channa and riding his horse Kanthaka, Gautama quit his palace for the life of a mendicant. It's said that the horse's hooves were muffled by the gods to prevent guards from knowing of his departure.
Gautama initially went to Rajagaha and began his ascetic life by begging for alms in the street. After King Bimbisara's men recognized Siddhārtha and the king learned of his quest, Bimbisara offered Siddhārtha the throne. Siddhārtha rejected the offer, but promised to visit his kingdom of Magadha first. Upon attaining enlightenment, he left Rajagaha and practiced under 2 hermit teachers of yogic meditation. After mastering the teachings of Alara Kalama, he was asked by Kalama to succeed him. However, Gautama felt unsatisfied by the practice, and moved on to become a student of yoga with Uddaka Ramaputta. With him he achieved high levels of meditative consciousness, and was again asked to succeed his teacher. But, once more, he was not satisfied, and again moved on. Siddhārtha and a group of 5 companions led by Kaundinya are then said to have set out to take their austerities even further. They tried to find enlightenment through deprivation of worldly goods, including food, practicing self-mortification, after nearly starving himself to death by restricting his food intake to around a leaf a nut per day. He collapsed in a river while bathing and almost drowned. A village girl named Sujata gave him some madhupayasa, after which Siddhārtha got back some energy. Siddhārtha began to reconsider his path. Then, he remembered a moment in childhood in which he had been watching his father start the seasons. Plowing, he attained a concentrated and focused state that was blissful and refreshing. The jhana awakening. According to the early Buddhist texts, after realizing that meditative jhana was the right path to awakening, but that extreme asceticism didn't work, Gautama discovered what Buddhists know as being the middle way, a path of moderation away from the extremes of self-indulgence and self-mortification, or the Noble Eightfold Path, as described in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is regarded as the first discourse of the Buddha. In a famous incident, after becoming starved and weakened, he is said to have accepted milk and rice pudding from a village girl named Sujata. Such was his emaciated appearance that she wrongly believed him to be a spirit that had granted her a wish. Following this incident, Gautama was famously seated under a pipal tree, now known as the Bodhi tree, in Bodh Gaya, India, when he vowed never to arise until he had found the truth. Kaundinya and 4 other companions, believing that he had abandoned his search and become undisciplined, ceased to stay with him and went to somewhere else. After a reputed 49 days of meditation, at the age of 35, he is said to have attained enlightenment, and became known as the Buddha or Awakened One, according to some sutras of the Pali Canon. At the time of his awakening he realized complete insight into the Four Noble Truths, thereby attaining liberation from samsara, the endless cycle of rebirth, suffering, and dying again. According to scholars, this story of the awakening and the stress on liberating insight is a later development in the Buddhist tradition, where the Buddha may have regarded the practice of dhyana as leading to nirvana and moksha.
Nirvana is the extinguishing of the fires of desire, hatred, and ignorance that keep the cycle of suffering and rebirth going. Nirvana is also regarded as the end of the world, in that no personal identity or boundaries of the mind remain. In such a state, a being is said to possess the 10 characteristics belonging to every Buddha. According to a story in the Ayakana Sutta, a scripture found in the Pali and other canons, immediately after his awakening, the Buddha debated whether or not he should teach the Dharma to others. He was concerned that humans were so overpowered by ignorance, greed and hatred that they could never recognize the path, which is subtle, deep, and hard to grasp. However, in the story, Brahma Sahampati convinced him, arguing that at least some will understand it. The Buddha relented, and agreed to teach. Formation of the Sangha. After his awakening, the Buddha met Taffasa and Balika, 2 merchant brothers from the city of Balkh in what is currently Afghanistan, who became his first lay disciples. It is said that each was given hairs from his head, which are now claimed to be enshrined as relics in the Shwe Dagon temple in Rangoon, Burma. The Buddha intended to visit Asita and his former teachers, Alara Kalama and Udakiramaputta, to explain his findings, but they had already died. He then travelled to the Deer Park near Varanasi in northern India, where he set in motion what Buddhists call the Wheel of Dharma by delivering his first sermon to the 5 companions with whom he had sought enlightenment. Together with him, they formed the first, the company of Buddhist monks. All 5 become arahants, and within the first 2 months, with the conversion of Yasa and 54 of his friends, the number of such arahants is said to have grown to 60. The conversion of 3 brothers named Kassapa followed, with their reputed 200, 300, and 500 disciples, respectively. This swelled the Sangha to more than 1,000. Travels and teaching. For the remaining 45 years of his life, the Buddha is said to have travelled in the Gangetic Plain, in what is now Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and southern Nepal, teaching a diverse range of people, from nobles to servants, murderers such as Angulimala, and cannibals such as Alavaka. Although the Buddha's language remains unknown, it's likely that he taught in one or more of a variety of closely related Middle Indo-Aryan dialects.
of which Pali may be a standardization. The Sangha traveled through the subcontinent, expounding the Dharma. This continued throughout the year, except during the 4 months of the Vassa rainy season when ascetics of all religions rarely traveled.
One reason was that it was more difficult to do so without causing harm to animal life. At this time of year, the Sangha would retreat to monasteries, public parks or forests, where people would come to them. The first Vassana was spent at Varanasi, when the Sangha was formed. After this, the Buddha kept a promise to travel to Rajagaha, capital of Magadha, to visit King Bimbisara. During this visit, Sariputta and Maudgalyayana were converted by Assaji, one of the first 5 disciples, after which they were to become the Buddha's 2 foremost followers. The Buddha spent the next 3 seasons at Veluvana Bamboo Grove Monastery in Rajagaha, the capital of Magadha.
Upon hearing of his son's awakening, Suddhodana sent, over a period, 10 delegations to ask him to return to Kapila Vastu. On the first 9 occasions, the delegates failed to deliver the message, and instead joined the Sangha to become Arahants. The 10th delegation, led by Kaludi, a childhood friend of Gautama's, however, delivered the message.
Now 2 years after his awakening, the Buddha agreed to return, and made a 2-month journey by foot to Kapilavastu, teaching the Dharma as he went. At his return, the royal palace prepared a midday meal, but the Sangha was making an alms round in Kapilavastu. Hearing this, Suddhodana approached his son, the Buddha, saying, "The Buddha is said to have replied." Buddhist texts say that Suddhodana invited the Sangha into the palace for the meal, followed by a Dharma talk. After this he is said to have become a Sotapanna.
During the visit, many members of the royal family joined the Sangha. The Buddha's cousins Ananda and Anuruddha became 2 of his 5 chief disciples. At the age of 7, his son Rahula also joined, and became one of his 10 chief disciples. His half-brother Nanda also joined and became an arahant. Of the Buddha's disciples, Sariputta, Maudgalyayana, Mahakasyapa, Ananda and Anuruddha are believed to have been the 5 closest to him. His 10 foremost disciples were reputedly completed by the quintet of Upali, Subhoti, Rahula, Mahakakana and Punna. In the 5th Vassana, the Buddha was staying at Matavana near Vasali when he heard news of the impending death of his father. He is said to have gone to Suddhodana and taught the Dharma, after which his father became an arahant.
The king's death and cremation was to inspire the creation of an order of nuns. Buddhist texts record that the Buddha was reluctant to ordain women. His foster mother Mahapajapati, for example, approached him, asking to join the Sangha, but he refused. Mahapajapati, however, was so intent on the path of awakening that she led a group of royal Sakyan and Kolian ladies, which followed the Sangha on a long journey to Rajagaha. In time, after Ananda championed their cause, the Buddha is said to have reconsidered and, 5 years after the formation of the Sangha, agreed to the ordination of women as nuns. He reasoned that males and females had an equal capacity for awakening, but he gave women additional rules to follow. Mahaparinirvana. According to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta of the Pali Canon, at the age of 80, the Buddha announced that he would soon reach parinirvana, or the final deathless state, and abandon his earthly body. After this, the Buddha ate his last meal, which he had received as an offering from a blacksmith named Kunda. Falling violently ill, Buddha instructed his attendant Ananda to convince Kunda that the meal eaten at his place had nothing to do with his passing, and that his meal would be a source of the greatest merit as it provided the last meal
For a Buddha, Metanando and von Hinuber argue that the Buddha died of mesenteric infarction, a symptom of old age, rather than food poisoning.
The precise contents of the Buddha's final meal are not clear, due to variant scriptural traditions and ambiguity over the translation of certain significant terms. The Theravada tradition generally believes that the Buddha was offered some kind of pork, while the Mahayana tradition believes that the Buddha consumed some sort of truffle or other mushroom. These may reflect the different traditional views on Buddhist vegetarianism and the precepts for monks and nuns. Whaley suggests that Theravadins would take Sukara Madhava, which can translate literally as pig soft, to mean soft flesh of a pig or pig soft food. That is, after Newman, a soft food favored by pigs, assumed to be truffle. He argues that as land names tend to be local and dialectical, as there are several plants known to have Sukara as a part of their names, and as Pali Buddhism developed in an area remote from the Buddha's death, Sukara Madhava could easily have been a type of plant whose local name was unknown to those in Pali regions. Specifically, local writers writing soon after the Buddha's death knew more about their flora than Theravadin commentator Buddhahood, who lived hundreds of years and hundreds of kilometers remote in time and space from the events described.
Unaware that it may have been a local plant name and with no Theravadin prohibition against eating animal flesh, Theravadins would not have questioned the Buddha eating meat and interpreted the term accordingly. According to Buddhist tradition, the Buddha died at Kusinara, which became a pilgrimage center.
Ananda protested the Buddha's decision to enter parinirvana in the abandoned jungles of Kusinara of the Malla Kingdom. The Buddha, however, is said to have reminded Ananda how Kusinara was a land once ruled by a righteous wheel-turning king and the appropriate place for him to die.
The Buddha then asked all the attendant bhikkhus to clarify any doubts or questions they had, and cleared them all in a way which others could not do. They had none. According to Buddhist scriptures, he then finally entered parinirvana. The Buddha's final words are reported to have been, "All composite things are perishable. Strive for your own liberation with diligence." His body was cremated and the relics were placed in monuments or stupas, some of which are believed to have survived until the present. For example, the Temple of the Tooth, or Dalada Malagawa, in Sri Lanka is the place where what some believe to be the relic of the right tooth of Buddha is kept at present. According to the Pali historical chronicles of Sri Lanka, the coronation of Emperor Asoka is 218 years after the death of the Buddha. According to two textual records in Chinese, the coronation of Emperor Asoka is 116 years after the death of the Buddha. Therefore, the time of Buddha's passing is either 486 BCE according to Theravada record or 383 BCE according to Mahayana record. However, the actual date traditionally accepted as the date of the Buddha's death in Theravada countries is 544 or 545 BCE, because the reign of Emperor Asoka was traditionally reckoned to be about 60 years earlier than current estimates. In Burmese Buddhist tradition, the date of the Buddha's death is the 13th of May 544 BCE, whereas in Thai tradition it is the 11th of March 545 BCE. At his death, the Buddha is famously believed to have told his disciples to follow no leader. Mahakashyapa was chosen by the Sangha to be the chairman of the First Buddhist Council, with the two chief disciples Maudgalyayana and Sariputta having died before the Buddha. While in the Buddha's days he was addressed by the very respected titles Buddha, Shakyamuni, Shakyasimha, Bhante and Bho. He was known after his parinirvana nirvana as Aryant.
Bhagava, Bhagavat, Bhagwan, Mahavira, Jina, Jinendra, Sasar, Sugata, and most popularly in scriptures is Tathagata.
Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.